intelligence. Meanwhile, in the Premium Insider Access, we can have a conversation as far as why I really liked over 3.5 total field goals for that Monday night awful stinker between the Cowboys and Giants, which hit, mind you, but still an opportunity to go deep into a smaller market play. You're going to get that at BetMGM. You're not going to get that at these shady, smaller books or offshore stuff. So take advantage of what we have for you at BetMGM. All you need to do is click that link. When you sign up in 47 states, you're going to get a risk-free opportunity on your first wager. That's going to be up to $1,000. $1,000, man. That's insanity right there. So take advantage of what we have for you. Both books are there. And again, just parlay that with the Premium Insider Access. Now you have a bankroll at both of these books and a place to be directed to and kind of nudged and just told. I'm trying to avoid that word because sometimes it has a negative connotation. Like, I'm telling you. No, this is all community. This is all fun. That's why we have so many people that are joining it, is because it's paying off from an economic standpoint, financial standpoint, but also from an educational standpoint. And yes, guys, I see it all the time. I think Lindquist is on there more than he is doing anything at home, right? All the time you get the inside the access. Let's supersize the shit out of this. You know, you used to go to the drive-thru and order a number 6. Would you like fries with a Coke with that? And you're like, nah, you know what? I'm going to supersize this. I'm going to go ahead and supersize. I'll pay the extra $1.09 and let's supersize the sucker. We're doing that right now. We don't need a spread. Who cares about the alternate numbers, etc.? We're just going Dolphins here. Dolphins win. Now, ask yourself, how do the Dolphins win? Is it a shootout or is it a low-scoring affair here? If you look at Tua being healthy enough to beat the Bengals, that's one thing. I'm just looking at the Bengals as a struggle bus. I don't trust anything about the Cincinnati Bengals simply because they beat the Jets. That's not for me. I don't think this is a game in which the Cincinnati Bengals are doing much, and they'll struggle. They'll make mistakes. They'll turn the football over. So I'm looking at the opposite here, which is who on Miami is going to be able to score. Chase Edmonds on the ground. Love Chase Edmonds on the ground here to score. In fact, I would start targeting even Miami if you can. In this case, not. But as an individual play, I would start targeting guys, even on the defense, like Miami's D special teams to score. Joe Burrow passing yards. This is going to be a risk here, but we're going to go under 254.5. I do not see a high-flying game for Burrow. Under 254.5. Chase Edmonds anytime score, and the Dolphins winning gets us plus 1250. I'm going to add you one more. Decent number for Joe Mixon. Let's see what 59.5 does, plus 3,000. Okay. I lied. I'm going to add one more. How does this all correlate? It's not going to do much because I think this all does correlate to an underplay, but under 47.5? Okay. Okay. Plus 5,000. Let's go ahead and add that to the slip. Folks, this is your supersized same game parlay for Thursday Night Football. Dolphins on the money line. Chase Edmonds anytime score. Joe Burrow under 254.5 passing yards. Joe Mixon over 59.5 rushing yards. Then under 47.5 total points. Bang. Plus 5,000. Enjoy the game. Have a blast. Thumbs up. Subscribe. Take advantage of BetMGM and let's do it. Go Tyreek. The cheetah is here.
Good morning, Stokastic baseball fans. My name's Terry McBride. This is the MLB Strategy Show. I have been awake for, 6-7 minutes now. Totally forgot I was on this show, guys. So it might be a little chaotic. We're going to jump around, but fortunately, Adam Scherer's been up. He's been working hard on this slate, I'm sure, and he's going to take us through everything. So, Adam, how's your morning going, bud?
That was a blatant lie other than you just picking up part. But yeah, my morning's good. I'm glad you were running late because I was cutting it close getting back from coffee. It appeared that everybody decided to get at the same time as me. But no, to clarify in chat, it was a really good guess that we were running late because I was late getting coffee. But I did get back a couple minutes before I was supposed to.
Yeah, this one firmly on me. But I appreciate that. And glad that we made it here just to begin with. We're going to go through the afternoon slate real quick. We're going to do kind of like an overview for that slate, I think. Just talk a little bit about the pitchers, the top stacks. And then we're going to dive into this weird little 740 main slate. 740 on FanDuel, actually. Is it a 740 start on DK as well?
940 start on DK.
Oh, it's a 940. Oh, that's even weirder. So FanDuel's putting in the Miami and Brewers game, I guess. Starts at 740, it looks like.
Yeah.
Well, that's funky.
Yeah. I don't know if you caught it. Did you see what DraftKings did with their night slate yesterday?
No.
So they ran a 3-game night slate starting at 940, which, totally normal, except for the Angels and A's started at 938. So they just cut off a game for 2 minutes.
That's a little silly. FanDuel usually just bumps it forward. They'll 938.
Yeah, so does DraftKings normally. They must have just missed it. But then also, they were just all over the place yesterday. So they did that. But then the Angels started their number one prospect at catcher, making his major league debut yesterday. He came from the Phillies in the Brandon Marsh trade, still on the Phillies in DraftKings. So just
that's helpful.
Yeah, just completely messing up the Angels yesterday.
Were you able to use him? Was he
I don't know. I didn't use him. I didn't even see like a notification about if you could or not. I didn't because I don't think you can when they're on the wrong team.
Yeah. That would have been a funky way to play that slate if you could.
Yeah.
So all right, let me real quick, let me pull up our little marketing doc here, guys. It's like I said, it was a quick hustle to jump on the air here, so I don't even know who we're brought to you by yet. Let's find out together. MLB Strategy Show. We're brought to you by Prize Picks. That's right. So Adam knew. So we're brought to you by our great sponsor, Prize Picks. We'll talk about them in a little bit. We'll hit the plug. Make sure you guys hit the like, the subscribe button, everything down there. We've got free, looks like player projections up on the site today. So if you're going over there for MLB, make sure you check those out. Obviously going to be a big help for you. And make sure if you're playing those night slates like the 938s or the 940s that we were just talking about, 100% free over at the site for DraftKings for the rest of the season. That gets you access to all the different tools and content for the night slates and helps you check out everything and get behind the scenes for free and make sure that you like what you're using. I guarantee you're going to. We'll talk about the promo codes and all that good stuff in a little bit, but Adam, let's dive into this afternoon slate. I'll pull it up over here and we haven't updated the early slate. Yeah, with the tools not updated for the early slate, let's just talk in like generalities about some of these guys, I guess, Adam, if that works for you. We've got for this 4-gamer.
Yeah, that works.
All right, so we've got first one off the top, Lucas Giolito going up against Louis Varland. White Sox against the Twins. Fairly close. White Sox coming in 3.9 implied runs. Twinkies with a 3.7. Looks like reasonably close versions of the standard lineups for both teams. Anything jumping out at you on that one?
DraftKings bumped up Giolito's price, which they should have on a 4-game slate, but I'm glad to see they actually did it. We've been seeing him down around like 7K or whatever on larger slates, and it's worked. But getting him up around 9K, it's still, relatively, I think it's the same. This isn't the strongest pitching slate, and that's being very generous. He's still the best pitcher on the slate in terms of talent, even with the issues he's had this year. Not a great matchup against Minnesota, not a ton of strikeouts, average-ish offense, but pitching's just really bad today. So I still think Giolito's going to look pretty good. On the other side with Louis Varland, 6,400. Again, pitching's not very good, so he's going to be a reasonable value option. Not that you're overly confident in him. Very limited sample in the majors so far, 19% strikeout percentage, 4.37 xFIP. But, again, I'm more confident in him than I am somebody like Jonathan Heasley.
Yeah.
So he's just going to end up in some lineups.
Yeah, and to put the whole pitching slate into perspective, we've got those two, Jonathan Heasley, Eduardo Rodriguez, Mike Baumann, Nate Eovaldi, Ranger Suarez, Javier Assad on this slate. So this is not a deep pitching slate. What about bats in this game? Anybody that you really like to get to, or are you kind of leaving the bats alone since both pitchers are at least viable?
Yeah, I don't love the park, but there is some power here. If you're not, I assume Giolito is going to be popular because I just can't imagine how he wouldn't be. So on a 4-game slate, I can see trying to get to some of these Twins bats. You have Jose Miranda leading off that's pretty appealing. Normally that's a rise, and you have Miranda hitting third or fourth. He's a good hitter. He's 3,500, has plenty of power. Correa, we know, is pretty much always one of the top shortstop options. Giolito this season, allowing a 246 actual ISO and 170 expected ISO to righties. He's been much better at limiting power to lefties, lower strikeout percentage against righties as well. So again, guys like Miranda, Correa, Urshela, Sanchez, those guys all look solid, but especially to me, Jose Miranda at 3,500. On the other side against Varland, like I said before, not much of a sample size in the majors so far, but has given up some power. 200 actual ISO, 150 expected to lefties, 294 actual, 291 expected to righties. You have power in this White Sox lineup. They are just relatively expensive for the most part. Gavin Sheets is cheap at 2,500. It's not a great park for power. It looks like it's around 60 degrees. So I'm not in love with either offense here, but I do think that there's, some high upside bats you can grab.
Yeah, and two, decently talented offenses going against one another, but I do think there's going to be a lot of focus on pitching in that game. Any thoughts, small slate, maybe if a lot of ownership does start going to Giolito, that becomes more of an attack point for grabbing Twins bats against him, just with that much of the field probably going to him?
Yeah, I think it's certainly reasonable. And then also with it being a 4-game slate, that's kind of normally where I draw the line in tournaments on taking bats against my pitchers. I don't mind doing it here, just grabbing like one, maybe two, especially with how weak the pitching is, it's really conceivable. Like Giolito doesn't have to have a great game to still be one of the top 2 scoring pitchers. He can just go out there, give up 3 runs, 6 innings, score, call it 16, 17 DraftKings points, and still be really useful on this slate. So I think it is reasonable to maybe play Giolito and Miranda in the same lineup, or and Correa in the same lineup, something like that. Obviously it's not ideal because they're going against each other, but I think it's made up for in the fact that it just is naturally a contrarian build. And then it's just really not hard to see how it works out on a slate like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's not a lot going on with this slate. So I think anything that you do to get a little bit different can definitely give you a nice boost. If you're getting to a good bat against that pitcher, makes a ton of sense. Let's take a look. We'll move on to the next one, and we'll zip through these last couple here on this slate. The Royals against the Tigers, Jonathan Heasley of Eduardo Rodriguez. Tigers favored, 4.1 implied run total, 3.6 for the Royals. Anything to see here? Either pitcher, we know Rodriguez, maybe has talent, one of the most unlucky pitchers in the league, but that hasn't really been the case this year. He's just been bad this year. And then Heasley, I think, just has been bad.
Yeah.
Any love for these guys?
I mean, I think for Rodriguez, just given the slate, I can see getting there, and you're really just banking on past year's talent. I mean, he's been bad this year. He's been unlucky in previous years, and people confuse it for him being bad. This year, he's just legitimately been bad. 18.4% strikeout percentage, 4.42 xFIP. That's on this slate, though, not bad. It's kind of just, middle of the road, I think. He's cheap. It's a decent matchup against KC. We don't have that lineup yet, but typically you're getting solid hitters at the top, and then, it drops off a bit towards the bottom. It's not, they've been a team that anybody that watches these shows knows I play a lot of this year, because I kind of think that the talent there is better than their actual numbers to date suggest. So it's not like I think it's a great spot, but, just all things considered on this slate, I can still see getting to Rodriguez. On the other side for Heasley, I mean, he's facing the Tigers, which is about as good as it gets from an upside standpoint for a pitcher, but it's just still so hard to want to get to this guy, especially because they priced him up to 7,100 as well. 15.6% strikeout percentage, 10.6% walk percentage. His K-minus BB percentage is worse than any pitcher pitching today, with the exception of Javier Assad. 5.42 xFIP, 1.6 home runs per 9. I get it if he's not getting ownership. I guess the most likely way I could see getting to Heasley is, and we don't have ownership projections right now, but let's say Rodriguez is getting, 30, 40%. Let's say, I mean, Javier Assad's not going to get much probably, but let's just say Rodriguez is in that range, and then you have Heasley at 2, 3%. It makes some sense there, but there's nothing about him that makes me think he's good or likely to have success. It's purely a 4-game slate, let's hope weird shit happens type play.
Yeah, just taking on something that's totally uncomfortable, totally unlikely, just in that hope. So that makes a lot of sense. Hopefully everybody out there sees it that way and understands what you're saying there. You mentioned the Royals are a team that you roster a decent amount of the time. I agree with that. I think there's a lot of talent on that team, and they're going to be one of the teams that turns around like your Orioles pretty quickly, I think, in the next few seasons. Yep. Are you going to them today here against Eduardo Rodriguez? You think that's a good spot?
I think it's an okay spot. He has been better at limiting power to righties this year. That's actually a trend we've seen from him in the past as well. But the same things that normally apply to Kansas City still pretty much do. Bobby Witt lost third base eligibility, so he's a little bit more difficult to get to now as a 6K just shortstop. But he's still really good. Really high upside option. Melendez, lefty, MPE. But like I said, Rodriguez hasn't Hasn't really been good against lefties, so still perfectly fine getting there. Perez looks good. I wouldn't shy away from Pasquantino, even though it's lefty-lefty, but he's gotten a little bit more expensive as well. So I still like Kansas City, but Bobby Witt losing MPE combined with them getting a little bit more expensive does make them a little bit more difficult to get to.
All right. And then what about the terrible Tigers on the other side of that one?
I think they actually look pretty solid here. I mean, this lineup is garbage, but other than that part of it, I guess, like Akil Baddoo leading off at 2,700, then Riley Green at 4,400. They look good. I like Baez at 4,100. Harold Castro with MPE hitting cleanup is cheap. Jonathan Scope is cheap. So I do like the matchup. I hate the lineup, obviously, but Heasley this year, 173 expected ISO to righties, 199 to lefties. He's pitching in Comerica as opposed to Kauffman, which, it's still not a great park for home runs, but it is a decent park for hitters in general. One of the best batter's eyes in baseball. You typically see balls hit harder in this park. So I do think that it's a good spot for the Tigers. It's kind of, to me, they're very similar, where like it's a good spot for Heasley, but he sucks, and it's a good spot for the Tigers, but they suck. One side probably wins out.
Yeah, you'd like to think that one of these things is going to happen. All right,
so you could get a 2-run, 5-inning start or something, but
yeah, a really close, low-scoring game, I suppose, or everything coming off the bullpen. But hopefully we get a little bit of interest for DFS purposes out of that one, because it is on this silly 4-game slate. We've got in the next one, we've got both lineups in the Orioles and Red Sox. Mike Baumann on the hill taking on Nate Eovaldi. Eovaldi with the 5.1 implied total behind him, 4.1 implied total for the Orioles. What do you like in this one? Either pitcher?
Yeah, I like Eovaldi here. Just again, given the context of the slate, $8,800 for him, I think is perfectly reasonable. 22.7% strikeout percentage, 3.38 xFIP. Would certainly expect him to be one of the most popular pitchers on the slate today.
Yeah, I think he would make a ton of sense to go to. Any love for the Baumann side? Baumann against the Red Sox here?
Not really. Tough matchup. Not a great pitcher, kind of a middle of the road prospect for Baltimore. Probably a reliever long term if he sticks in the majors. Threw 58 pitches in 4 innings his last time out. I don't expect him to go like super deep into this game. He's cheap, but I doubt you really need it. So pretty tough sell, I think, on getting to Baumann.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just don't think you're going to see the depth out of that, even for one of these dice roll type of plays at 5.6K on DK. I just don't see it. So, what about bats? Are you taking shots with Orioles? Are you taking shots with Red Sox on both sides here? Two pretty good offenses.
Yeah, I like both sides here. We have the Orioles A lineup back out there after the garbage they ran out yesterday. Mullins is back. Henderson is back. You have Stowers back, which gives you a cheap, power bat hitting 8th. Rougned Odor, not a great hitter, but, does have some pop hitting 7th. It's pretty much the best lineup they can run out there. Rutschman's back as well. Eovaldi is a solid pitcher, but he has allowed a 221 expected ISO to lefties and a 189 expected ISO to righties this year. This park's going to play up right-handed power more than Camden Yards does, so that does set up well for Ryan Mountcastle and Austin Hayes in particular. It downplays left-handed power, so that's bad for everybody else, but they're just such good hitters, Mullins, Rutschman, Santander, Henderson, that I don't care too much about the fact that they're in Fenway. Obviously, I would prefer that they were in Camden Yards, but I do think it looks like a high upside spot for them. And like I said before, I certainly expect Eovaldi to get a lot of ownership here, so that makes them look a little bit better as well. On the other side for Boston, I would assume that they are the most popular offense today.
I would have to think, right?
It's got to be either them or Philly, and Philly's hitting in crappy weather in Chicago, so I assume it's the Red Sox, and it probably should be. 4.7 implied run total. Baumann, not anything special, and then on top of that too, you have a pretty overworked Orioles bullpen given how the series has gone so far. So I do think there's a lot of upside if they can get to Baumann early as well. So they look really good. It's really just a matter of what does the actual ownership end up looking like. Limited sample so far this year, 164 expected ISO to righties, 171 to lefties for Mike Baumann. Tristan Casas is $2,200. For some reason, his price tag dropped after yesterday. That really stands out just because kind of the theme for this slate so far has been DraftKings did a good job with the pricing, and then you get Tristan Casas at $2,200, so that's going to look like a really good value. And then obviously the rest of this team is just solid. Yeah,
that is a solid price for a kid who only hits home runs. Not too bad. Did you ever read that Matt Christopher book? Was Matt Christopher a part of your childhood?
Oh yeah, I totally forgot him.
Kid who only hit homers.
You said his name right. You said his name, and I was just like, that sounds really familiar.
Yeah, that just popped into my head as I was saying that as the words were coming out of my mouth about Casas. Haven't thought about that.
Jeff Williams asked in chat about Eovaldi's pitch count. It's a good point. I had totally forgotten about that, but he went 3 innings in his most recent rehab start, so I would guess maybe you're getting like 5 or something here.
Which probably for a pitcher of that caliber, I think, unlike the guy on the other side, that's probably enough for him, I would think, on a 4-game slate to at least be
on this slate. He's certainly still playable.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's jump into the last game here on deck for the early slate. We've got the Phils and the Cubbies you just mentioned out in Chicago. Ranger Suarez on deck for the Phillies. Javier Assad on the mound for the Cubbies. 4.8 implied total for the Phils, 3.4 for the Cubs at home. So Phillies definitely getting more weight here. Ranger Suarez, decent pitcher, good at keeping the ball in the yard. Hasn't really had much strikeout upside, but going up against a good team for strikeouts. You getting any shares of him, and then any love at all for Assad on the other side?
Suarez, I think, is probably the second best pitcher, given that we're expecting Evaldi to be limited. Favorable pitching weather in Chicago. It's like 60 degrees. Looks like, if anything, the wind's blowing in. Might be side to side, definitely not blowing out. 3.3 implied run total. Not a great strikeout pitcher, but a good pitcher at limiting production in general. 20% strikeout percentage against righties with a 123 expected ISO this year. 19% against lefties with a sub 100 expected ISO. We don't have a Cubs lineup yet, but there's likely to be plenty of strikeouts in it. So I do think, if you were playing cash on this slate, I would think that you're going Giolito Suarez.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense there. And then you mentioned the bats for the Phillies potentially being popular. I agree. It looks like a spot that's, good enough to go to anyway. A lot of bats that we're familiar with in a good 1 through 6 at the very least in the projected lineup. Is the Phillies going to be a part of your plan if you're playing 150 lineups in this tournament?
Probably, but it does depend on ownership. I like the spot better for Boston than I do for Philadelphia. So if you get similar ownership, I would expect that I'm just playing more Boston and less Philly, but kind of gonna just have to wait and see how that plays out. One spot not even one spot, just one thing I think is interesting here is I still don't know what to make of Javier Assad, because most projection systems absolutely hate him, but that's because prior to this year, he was just a trash minor league pitcher. And then this year he made significant adjustments, improvements, whatever you want to call it, and basically just became a different pitcher at AAA, striking out like 24.5% of hitters. It hasn't shown up in the majors yet. He's walking 13.5% of hitters, 18.5% strikeout percentage. He's been bad in the majors, but I just still have trouble knowing exactly what to expect, because I think projection systems are pretty drastically undervaluing him, just given that they are, as you should, they're waiting all these previous years, but he's just been a totally different pitcher this year. So I don't think he's as bad as they suggest. I don't think he's likely to keep walking 13.5% of hitters. Maybe that strikeout percentage comes up, maybe it doesn't, but I do think he's probably a little bit better than projection systems are giving him credit for.
Okay. Yeah. And that is something that we see, guys make mechanical changes, make specific changes, add a pitch, something like that. And it takes a long time for these projection systems to catch up sometimes. So yeah, 24.7, 24.8 in AA and AAA this year. That's a big jump up from the 18s and 17s he was putting up before that. And not totally unheard of. He's just turned 25 a month ago. So wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that he's improved. So that's an interesting call out. What about the Cubby side on the bats? Are you going to any Cubs, say Suzuki, Franmil Reyes, Ian Happ, Pat Wisdom, any of these power guys, or the Cubbies kind of uninteresting?
I mean, so I don't think it's a very good spot, but it's a 4-game slate. You're probably going to have ownership coming into Suarez. He doesn't give up right-handed power, but you do have right-handed power in this lineup with Contreras, Suzuki, if he's in there, Reyes, Horner, Wisdom. So I don't hate it, kind of in the same way that, I don't hate getting to like Baltimore. Well, I mean, I like Baltimore more. I think they're a better offense. I think it's a better spot, but like
you're going to maybe.
Yeah, you're going to be getting ownership going to Suarez, and there is power on the Cubs. So you're kind of just hoping that it's, the one pretty much every pitcher is going to have a few starts a year where they just don't have it. I think if Suarez is on his game, he's clearly going to have success here. But you're kind of just going to the Cubs hoping that a popular Suarez just doesn't have his stuff today, and they certainly at least have guys capable of doing damage if that's the case.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. But again, like I teed him up, Suarez is definitely good at keeping the ball in the yard and keeping the offenses limited. So tricky spot, but I agree. There's at least enough there. And you just reminded me of the old baseball saying about pitchers. It's 10 good starts, 10 bad starts, and you are what those other 10 starts out of your 30 are. That's your difference maker. So I think David Cohn says that a decent amount of the time. Probably where I picked that up, or maybe it was an old Jim Cott expression.
Yeah, so I don't know where it came from, but I've definitely heard it too.
Yeah. So let's talk real quick. That brings us to the end of this early slate, guys. Let me do some business here real quick. Stokastic Plus MLB with promo code MLB Strategy Show. Basically, this is going to get you guys behind the scenes if you're a new subscriber for 50% off your first week of any of the weekly plans, right? We're going to cut right to the chase on this one. It's promo code MLB Strategy Show, all one word, all caps. It's really long. It's a little bit clunky, but it's going to get you behind the scenes on the platinum plan. And with NFL going on, with NBA starting up, NHL starting up, that is the plan that you want to be on. It's the one that includes every single thing that we cover, every piece of content, every tool on the site, be it top stacks for baseball, be it the boom bust tool for basketball, some of these incredible tools. Everything's rolled up into the platinum plan. Everything except for Fantasy Cruncher is included in this deal. You have to add Fantasy Cruncher as a paid add-on after the first week here is up. It can't be attached to the discounted promo, but that's a different thing that our customer support can help you guys out with. If you want to just use the MLB for the last couple of weeks of the season here, you can use this on the MLB only plan. That's a perfectly viable approach. You can use it on any of the weekly plans that you want. 50% off your first week of Stokastic Plus. Promo code MLB Strategy Show. One word, all caps. Let's dive into the.
Hang on, one.
Oh, go ahead.
Just one thing to kind of recap that early slate. So we actually do have the data for it. It just wasn't where I thought it would be. So that stuff is on. If anybody's using the tools and hasn't figured this out on their own yet, the 110 slate is on all of the main slate stuff, and then the later slate is on night slate. So I was looking for it as early and then the night slate being main. So we have all of it. It pretty much is in line with what we talked about. Right now we have Philly projected for a little bit more ownership than Boston. Makes me like Boston a little bit more. We have the White Sox projected to go a bit under owned against Varland. The Orioles look like a very good combination of top stack and value. From the pitcher side, Suarez leading the way in ownership, Giolito and Rodriguez right behind him. Then a little bit of a drop off to Varland, a little bit more of a drop off to Heasley and Evaldi, and then Assad and Bauman not really getting any ownership. All of that pretty much is what I was expecting, and checks out, makes sense to me. So nothing glaring that stands out, but for anybody using the tools, that stuff is up. I just was looking in the wrong place.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great call out because I wouldn't have found that without some instruction.
Yeah, well, I refreshed it to talk about the night part, and then I see Ranger Suarez in ownership. I'm like, oh, cool. They gave us like that for the night slate. And I was like, oh, maybe they just labeled it differently than
right. Yeah, maybe somebody mixed things up a little bit. That's all right. I'm sure we'll get it straightened out, or at least everybody watching the show now knows where to find everything. So let me just get this last little thing updated. I've been updating my whole spreadsheet and everything in the background while we've been talking so that I can talk through the main slate. And I am one click away from being ready. All right. We should be good. So let's jump in. We've got the 5-gamer, like we talked about a minute ago, 5 games on FanDuel, 4 games on DK. FanDuel starting up at 740 with the Marlins against the Brewers. We've got Braxton Garrett. We've got Eric Lauer, a couple of southpaws going for both of these teams. Any love for either one of these pitchers on the 5-gamer for FanDuel?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lauer's decent. Pretty good matchup for him. He's 9,600, which is relatively expensive, but only a 5-game slate there. 3.3 implied run total for the Marlins. The Brewers still have stuff to play for, so you shouldn't have to worry about them doing anything restrictive with their pitching. 22.7% strikeout percentage, 4.2 xFIP. I think he looks pretty solid at 9,600. Garrett on the other side, 24.5% strikeout percentage, 3.42 xFIP. He's been good this year. Negative park shift, does face a lot of right-handed power here, which is a little bit scary. That combined with him getting out of Miami, 185 actual ISO, 163 expected ISO to righties for Garrett this year. Only a 22.2% strikeout percentage against them compared to 31% with basically no power allowed to lefties. So he's fine in tournaments, I think, but it is kind of a scary spot.
Yeah, and the price tag at $9,000 for Braxton Garrett, that just doesn't sit right as I'm thinking it through in my head. But yeah, for tournament play, if you're playing a full slate of lineups, the talents seems like it's there over the 79 and a third innings this year. So I guess I can get there. What about the teams? What about the bats? That's another thing, actually, real quick. I don't love throwing lefties against the Brewers necessarily. There's a lot of decent right-handed power bats in that lineup. Are you getting to any shares of the Marlins? Are you getting to any shares of the Brewers in stacks?
I think the Brewers look pretty interesting here. Again, just for the same reasons that I don't love Braxton Garrett here, even though I think he's good. Not only do you have a bunch of right-handed power, which is obviously scary, but you're also getting him out of Miami. You're getting that negative park shift going into formerly known as Miller Park, now called something really weird, American First Family Field or whatever it is. But yeah, I think it's a high upside spot for the Brewers. Right now we have Miami first in top stack percentage. And Milwaukee 7th. Okay, so that's going to change, but
that was polite of you.
Yeah, that's going to be different, but I do like the Brewers here, especially if they're not getting a ton of ownership.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that, like we were just both saying, that righties, decent amount of righty power bats, like a Hunter Renfroe, a Mike Brasso is like kind of a platoon righty specialist for some power. Even Keston Hiura, I've called him out on a few recent shows. Just he's had a killer little season, over 241 plate appearances, good amount of power, 232 ISO, 14 homers, 16.1% barrel rate. So I don't like, I wouldn't sleep on Keston Hiura. And you get multiple multi-position guys. He's first and second, and then you get Luis Urias, second, short, and third. So not too bad with the multi-position guys toward the back of the lineup here for the
Keston
Brewers.
Hiura basically just going from a 3 true outcome player to a 2 true outcome player,
which works for our DFS purposes.
Fine for
That's
DFS.
Totally fine.
I'm not sure the Brewers like it too much, but
yeah, he was such a highly regarded hit tool prospect on his way up too. It's kind of surprising. Like, he was really thought to be one of these excellent back kids. Same with who's a kid in Texas, Calhoun. No, not Calhoun. Doesn't matter. We'll talk about it.
Willie.
Yeah, it was Willie Calhoun that I was thinking of. Yeah,
but he kept being difficult to strike out. I think he just didn't hit
it's just the bat never came around.
Hero's gone the opposite route. Like I actually had no idea that he had a 120 WRC plus this year and 230 ISO, because all that stands out for him. And I don't care about strikeouts, but still it stands out so much. Like, the guy's striking out 42% of the time.
Yeah, that's a little bit aggressive.
Yeah.
But I mean, when he does make contact, he's one of those guys like a Gary Sanchez, like I say about him all the time. When he does manage to make contact, the ball typically still does travel, and he's really put that together on Hero here. So I'll have some Brewers and he'll be involved in it, and as will the stars and the obvious names up toward the top of the lineup. What about the Marlins on the other side going up against Lauer here? Any love for Miami, assuming that we'll see some changes in the tools?
Yeah, I think the top stack tool is going to change. I don't really like the spot against Lauer. I certainly don't like Miami's offense. What they do have going for them is that they are, in Milwaukee, and I do expect that they'll be relatively low owned. We have them getting about 8% aggregate ownership right now. That part seems correct to me. Certainly don't agree with the 14.4% top stack percentage, but I think we kind of just have them in Milwaukee reversed. So yeah, it's, as long as they're not getting much ownership, I do like, that you're getting them in Milwaukee. John Birdie's cheap at 2,900. Brian Anderson's 2K flat. De La Cruz is 2,500. They're really cheap. They do have some right-handed power. It's a low probability spot, but I don't think they'll get much ownership either.
Yeah, it's a team that's, it's out of those uncomfortable roster type teams. It's still not one that I love going to, even in tournaments. But I think on a 5-game slate, they're certainly viable here against the lefty. So I'll probably pick up some, and it'll be around the middle of the lineup, guys, I think. Anything else to call out about this one before we move on to the A's and the Angels?
Nope.
All right. First game up on the DK slate, Athletics taking on the Angels. Cole Irvin going for the Athletics, kind of a target for me in terms of rostering bats on the other side against him. Usually Shohei Ohtani on the mound for the Angels, so we don't get the Ohtani bat in the lineup for DFS purposes, but he is still there in real life, of course. I'm assuming you're not a big Cole Irvin fan here, so if you are, correct me, but talk to me about Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah, I think Ohtani looks great. You're correct, not a huge Irvin fan here, but 10-5 for Ohtani, I think, is very reasonable. 32.9% strikeout percentage, 2.72 xFIP, just an absolutely fantastic pitcher going up against a not very good Oakland lineup. It's a positive park upgrade for Oakland, but other than that, there's no real reason that I wouldn't like Ohtani here. 2.6 implied run total for the A's. 4-game slate, not a ton of really good pitching. I think he's clearly one of, if not the best pitching options.
Yeah, it seems like an obvious kind of a spot. And the A's have just been a target team for pitchers who are nowhere near as good as Shohei Ohtani for me all season long. So absolutely going to have some of him. It's just going to be a matter of, how thin sliced I go as relative to wherever the field comes down. But that's definitely going to be a part of my plans. What about rostering Angels bats against Cole Irvin, knowing that there's no Ohtani in the lineup? Does that take them down a couple pegs for you in terms of wanting to get there?
Yes and no. I certainly would prefer that Ohtani were in the lineup, and typically it does make it difficult for me to get to them. But I just like this spot. Cole Irvin's been fine this year, but he is someone that really benefits from pitching in Oakland. He's allowed a 171 actual ISO to righties this year, 204 expected ISO, 18.1% strikeout percentage, and now you're just going to get a bunch of right-handed hitters in a much more favorable hitter's park than Oakland is. Rengifo is going to be hitting from the right side. Mike Trout clearly is fantastic. Taylor Ward at 4,100 is going to look good. Matt Duffy, Joe Adell, Max Stassi, if he's in the lineup, has some power for a catcher. So I just think it's, even without Ohtani, it's a pretty solid lineup to get to against a pitcher that is getting a negative park shift and has had issues with right-handed power all season.
And then on the other side, the A's. Any reason to roster A's against Ohtani here?
Pretty tough to make a case for them.
Yeah, I don't really see it. Not even, I don't really want any one-offs from these guys. There's not a ton of power in this lineup. The lead for home runs is Seth Brown with 25, which is a nice number, 225 ISO for him, 121 WRC plus over 517 plate appearances. You get the lefty bat, but just not a lot around him and not a lot to see here. So
yeah. I would expect if I get to Oakland, it's either Brown or one of the catchers because they're both good and catcher is just a tough position to fill.
Sure, makes sense. Looking at the we got 2 catchers on the DK projected lineup, and we've got 3 catchers on the FanDuel projected line.
I was voted catcher on FanDuel too.
Yeah. So we've got Vogt, Langoliers, and Murphy as catchers. Everybody else except for, looks like 4 other players actually, with multi-position eligibility on top of that. Weird little lineup in FanDuel purposes, but I don't really see that much utility for them, and not much need to click on those names. Let's move on. We'll talk Dodgers. We'll talk Padres. Definitely 2 better offenses to go to. Bruce Graterol on the hill for the Dodgers, answering back with Sean Manaea on the hill mound for the Padres. Manaea, not the best season out of him compared to what we've seen in the past, but maybe serviceable, but tough matchup here. And then Graterol, 46 2/3 innings, 22% strikeout rate taken on the Pods. Do you like either one of these pitchers?
No. For Manaea, really, really difficult spot. He is cheap, which is nice at 7,100. We have him pulling 14% ownership, going a little bit under owned, 22% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. So just the fact that it's a 4-game slate and he does have some level of talent, he has certainly been disappointing this year, but overall a 22.9% strikeout percentage, 4.04 xFIP. It is kind of a case of he's been disappointing relative to Sean Manaea standards. Yep. He's been fine as an actual pitcher. And if you just kind of remove the name and say this guy is $7,100 against the Dodgers, I think the takeaway for everybody would sort of just be, all right, well, he's probably a little bit underpriced for his talent, but it's also a really tough matchup. So it all kind of just evens out and he's just a neutral pitcher on a 4-game slate. When you throw in the name Sean Manaea, I think you just kind of get the knee-jerk reaction where it's like, oh, he's really struggled. But, it's kind of like we've talked about with Giolito when his price is cheap. He's priced for what he's done this year. He's not priced for previous year Sean Manaea at this point. So on a 4-game slate, kind of just looks fine. Wouldn't be upset if I don't get to a lot of him because the matchup obviously is brutal. I think it's supposed to be Andrew Heaney following Brewster Graterol. Okay. We've seen the Dodgers not really looking to have Heaney go too deep in the game. So it does make sense if they're going to use him as a piggyback now. He has really good strikeout stuff, but he's $9,700. He threw 86 pitches in 3 2/3 last time out. I'm assuming you're getting, 80-ish, 70 to 80 pitches from him at 9,700 in a tough spot. I think it's difficult to get there, even though he does have the highest strikeout percentage on the slate.
Okay. So that's probably just going to be a cross-off for you in terms of rostering him, even though he's not starting, you just kind of
I wouldn't really expect to get, we have him projected for 10% ownership. We have him with an 18% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. So I guess he's going a little bit under owned, but the thing that if he were on the early slate, I would be really interested in getting to him. On this slate, it's kind of just why am I get the ownership, but is he really going to outscore Shohei Ohtani and Carlos Rodon in their respective matchups enough that I want to get there? And, I think the answer is probably no.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think those, especially with those premium names and some other at least decent options on the board as well. I think that's it's a thin needle to thread. So probably not for me. What about bats in this one? Are we taking a look at any of the Pods going up against Heaney and the opener there? And on the other side, any reason to go to the Dodgers against the struggling Manaea?
I'm interested in both sides here. Certainly didn't work out for me last night on the night slate, but I think I probably end up taking a similar approach tonight. Yesterday, you had 2 better, well, not even better, just different good pitchers. I guess kind of a similar spot with Urias and whoever was pitching for Musgrove. Yes. But on the 3-game night slate, it was a game where I just ended up playing a lot of it because obviously they were facing good pitchers. But if you're going to have a short slate and not get a ton of ownership going to the Dodgers or the Padres, that's a spot that I want to attack just because of the talent that they have. And it kind of looks similar here. We have the Dodgers getting 15% aggregate ownership on DraftKings. That puts them behind the Angels, behind the Giants, behind the Rangers, pretty comparable to the Mariners. But they're still the Dodgers, and they're facing, a middle-of-the-road pitcher in Manaea. He's allowed a 187 expected ISO to righties this year. He's been much better against lefties, 108 expected ISO there, but not striking them out at the same clip. You're going to get a right-handed heavy lineup and any lefties in it are just going to be good. I'm assuming it's going to be Freeman and Muncy. So it's a pretty dangerous spot for Manaea. I like getting to the Dodgers as long as the ownership doesn't catch up to the top stack tool. And then the same thing for the Padres. I think that Heaney's a good pitcher, but he has had home run issues this year so far. 1.8 home runs per 9, 177 expected ISO to righties, 173 to lefties. And that shouldn't be surprising because this is somebody that throughout his career has had good strikeout stuff, even if it hasn't been quite as good as this year, but has a tendency to just not locate well within the strike zone and give up home runs. The Padres certainly have plenty of power that can take advantage of him if he's not locating well. So I don't think it's like a comfortable spot for either stack because they are facing good pitchers, but I do like the ceiling that they give. And then also when you look at this slate as a whole, there is some bad pitching, but it's not like the early slate where like every pitcher is really questionable. Here it's kind of, there's a few pitchers that you would love to pick on, but those offenses are obviously getting ownership. But then you also have, guys pitching like Ohtani and Carlos Rodon where you kind of just write off those offenses. So I think it makes it a little bit easier to get to the Dodgers and Padres.
Yeah, it seems taking that point, it seems like a fairly cut and dry slate. Like if you just threw it at somebody and said like, hey, where would you end up on this? I think a lot of people would come down pretty similarly. So it might be a good slate to get a little bit, more far afield with some of the decisions that you're making. But I think some of these pitching decisions and some of these hitting decisions are going to be just so obvious and so unavoidable that there's going to be a lot of people on similar type plays. So I'm going to be really curious to see how my ownership shares come out at the end of this and how the top stack tool ends up sorting out through the day. It's going to be important for sure on a 4-game slate to filter through that info. Let's talk real quick on Prize Picks here, our great sponsor. They are a daily prop-based contest site, you guys. So there's not sharks, there's not optimizers, there's not mass entries. You're not competing against people who are putting in 150 lineups. You're not competing against Adam and Alex and guys like that. You're just using your knowledge of sports to create your entry sheet. If you put together 5-player lineups, my dog's here to say hi. He loves Prize Picks too. You put together 5-player lineups. If you hit all 5 of them, you can win up to 10 times your entry fee. It's pretty sweet. We've got tools up at the site for you to be able to use it. It's all player prop based. If you can't bet also in your state, if you have a restriction on sports betting, this is a great way to get your action around player props. So make sure you're checking it out. If you click the link in the description down below here, you get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum and up to $100 deposit match bonus when you sign up and make a deposit with Prize Picks. So make sure you're checking them out. We are going to apologize to Prize Picks and not make our 2 picks because we're running a little bit short on time, and I do have to read the primetime read here as well. So if you want to get access to all of Stokastic Plus NFL tools and single game, NFL tools for showdown and single game slates for only $1, click the link in the description of this video below and use the promo code PRIMETIME, all caps, all one word, at the checkout to get 1 week of our NFL primetime package for only $1. So that's showdown and single game primetime slates, $1 using the promo code Primetime. It includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer for showdown single games, including projections, ownership, top plays, lineup builder, expert Discord. This offer is valid through September 29th, which is today. How about that? So this offer ends today. Make sure that you note that Fantasy Cruncher is not included in this. It's a paid add-on, like I said, for the other promo. Fantasy Cruncher is never going to be included in the promos here, you guys. So just remember that as you hear these things that we talk about. Adam, let's jump back into baseball, what everybody is actually here to hear us talk about. Texas Rangers, Seattle Mariners. John Gray was the guy I kind of had in mind when I was saying there are other, pretty decent pitchers on here who, maybe will sneak through the cracks a little bit. He's looking pretty good to me here in this spot. I don't love attacking the Mariners, but I think it's a serviceable enough matchup. And he's been pretty solid this year, his first year in Texas. So I like that spot. Curious to hear what you think there. And then Marco Gonzalez on the mound for the Mariners. Much more of a target for me in terms of rostering bats against him. So what do you think of John Gray?
I like John Gray a lot here. I agree with you. Like I typically don't like targeting the Mariners too much, but they don't have Julio Rodriguez, which clearly waters down this lineup. It's also a really good park to pitch in. Gray is reasonably priced at 8,500. He threw 87 pitches in his last start, which was good to see. I would expect that he's in a similar range here. Like the Rangers don't have anything to play for. There's no real reason for them to run John Gray into the ground, but we can at least expect him not to be overly limited here. So, I would expect you get 5-6 innings, 90 pitches, give or take. And he's just a good pitcher at a reasonable price tag. He struck out 26.5% of hitters this year, 3.36 xFIP, reasonable ownership coming in at 23.5%. That's compared to 60% on Ohtani, 67 on Rodon, 14 on Manaea. Like I think that Gray just looks really good here. On the other side, there is 17% ownership coming into Gonzalez as well. I get it. He's 6,500. The Rangers have a 3.4 implied run total. It's a good park to pitch in. With the ownership there, though, I still think it's pretty tough to get to Gonzalez just because I don't think you're going to need the savings all that much. You also have, at least right now, like we have Sean Manaea with a much higher chance of being a top 2 pitcher at lower ownership and $600 more. If that holds, I'm going to just take my chances with Manaea. It's one of those situations where I think that, like if you're manually clicking buttons, it's kind of difficult because like you feel like you have more safety going to Gonzalez in Seattle against the Rangers than you do going to Manaea against the Dodgers. But they project not. We have Manaea projected for 16 points. We have Gonzalez projected for like 14. I think that even with the tough matchup, Manaea is the better pitcher.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And that's exactly how I was going to spin it coming out of, if you hadn't hit on that point. I think I'm just spending the extra $600 to get to Sean Manaea basically every time if I'm making that decision manually, like you're suggesting there. So yeah, I have no love for Marco. He's a guy I've targeted over time and it's worked out pretty well this season. 3.69% home run rate allowed, only a 12.9% strikeout rate. There's not a lot of DFS upside in that guy. So I'm not going to be getting there. What about on the Rangers bats side of things? Because as I mentioned, this is a pitcher I like to target with bats. Are you going to any stacks of Rangers? Are you going to any one-offs of Rangers?
Yeah, I think they're fine. I hate the park. If you saw any of last night's game, you understand why. If you saw the ball that Adolis Garcia hit off of Kirby, just absolute rocket to center that just turns into an out.
Just dies, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you still have talent here. Corey Seager wasn't in the lineup yesterday, may or may not be in the lineup today after getting hit by a pitch a couple games ago. But Marcus Semien, 4,500 from the right side. Adolis Garcia, 4,300. Really like Josh Jung at 2,300. This is another just top hitting prospect that DraftKings thinks is like a career minor leaguer or something. So he looks like a really good value. He's kind of in that Tristan Casas mold from the early slate. So I do think, it's a 3.4 implied run total. It's a tough park to hit in. It's not my favorite stack to get to, but there is some power here. You are talking about a pitcher in Gonzalez that doesn't miss a lot of bats. 182 actual ISO, 160 expected ISO allowed to righties this year. And don't sleep on the lefties. 199 actual ISO, 177 to lefties. You're going to get a predominantly right-handed lineup, but if Corey Seager is in there, he still looks good. Nate Lowe at 3,400 is still a very reasonable option to get to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just not a pitcher that I'm going to fear rostering lefties against, the
right.
Low strikeout rate, the premium contact allowed. I'm just not.
You kind of, when you take guys against Gonzalez, that there's, especially in this park, there's a decent chance if you're watching the game, you're going to end up pissed off because you just get a bunch of fly balls to the warning track. But like, he's not one of those guys that you're likely to watch the game and just see, your guys swinging and missing and striking out. And, it's just, you might get mad because you get a lot of like, if you follow the accounts on Twitter, so-and-so on the Rangers barreled a ball for an out 400 feet away. Like, but
117 mile an hour warning track fly ball.
Yeah. You're kind of just walking that line between, does it land on the warning track or does it land in the second row?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. What about on the other side? Same ballpark and same issues as far as that goes, but potentially going up against a much better pitcher, but a team we both like. I think the Seattle Mariners here. No Julio is a big downgrade, obviously, for the lineup, but still a lot of talent here. You going to any Mariner stacks?
I think they're one of the more difficult teams for me to get to, especially because they are projected for 14% ownership right now. Like, I would just rather go to the Padres against Heaney. I think that there's a lot of upside there. And Rodriguez is just such a big part of this Mariners team. When you talk about them being like an above average offense, Crawford, or not even really Crawford, France, Haniger, Suarez, Raleigh, these guys are all good. Crawford's cheap and leading off, but Rodriguez is just such a big part of any upside Seattle stacks that you make because of the power and speed that he offers. Him not being in there, combined with this park, combined with them not really being cheap and them getting ownership, I think it makes it kind of difficult to get to them.
Okay. What about if you are going to them, are you going as deep as Jared Kelenic, Jesse Winker, the two semi-struggling lefties, if they're hitting like 6th, 7th, like they're projected today? Would you include them in your plans if you were rostering Mariners?
Yeah, I think that they're a nice way to offset salary, and they're both guys that are talented. Jared Kelenic, a former top hitting prospect, hasn't really worked out so far, but may or may not get there. Jesse Winker, we know what he did prior to coming to a horrible park to hit in. He's got some power and he's priced down now. So I think those guys are both at least talented ways to offset lineup, or to offset salary, I should say. And then, the guys that I think you still really want to get to. And another reason where it's kind of rough, like France, Haniger, Suarez, all right-handed against Gray as well. Cal Raleigh, I think probably my favorite play from this team, just a catcher with a lot of power.
Yeah, monster bad for Cal Raleigh this season. Definitely a good call there. Let's jump over to the last game on deck. 4 minutes to go. Ryan Feltner going for the Rockies. Carlos Rodon going for the Giants in a great spot against the Colorado Rockies, pitching in San Francisco here. How much Rodon are we going to? It seems like a clear-cut great spot.
Yeah, a ton. Just really happy to get to as much Ohtani and Rodon as I can. Obviously, John Gray is like the third guy, and then I think you start mixing in the Minaya, Gonzalez, where you can't get to any of those three. But clear priority here, and he's getting the ownership at 67%, but a 45% chance of being a top 2 pitcher is just massive. Especially when you keep in mind, we talk about it a lot. You're not building the optimal lineup in baseball. So like there's a lot of times, of the 55% of the time Rodon's not a top 2 pitcher, there's still going to be a relatively high percentage of the time that he's still a pitcher capable of being in a tournament winning lineup because, he's the third best scorer or the fourth best scorer. And that he scores enough that you can still get there. So just such a high probability play that it's difficult for me to get away from him in a really good spot against a Rockies team that is just awful outside of Coors Field.
Yeah. It's just a team another one that I just target and I chase them around the country when they're out of Coors Field. And then I deal with Coors Field when they're at home. Any love for the Rockies pitcher? Any reason to go there?
Not that I mean, he's 5,400 in San Francisco. I guess that would be the reason. We do have him projected for basically the same top 2 pitcher percentage as Marco Gonzalez at like half the ownership. So that's the reason, I guess. I think it's much more likely that I just am pretty condensed on Ohtani, Rodon, and Gray.
Yeah, I think that's the correct and sensible way to approach the slate for sure. But that's interesting that he grades out like that. Not a guy that I would think of as a good pitcher. What about bats? I assume not much Rockies, but if there's anybody you want to call out from there, sure. And then what about the Giants going up against against Feltner?
Yeah, I mean, not really interested in the Rockies unless you're just making the case that it's a 4-game slate, and if they do well, 2/3 of the field just lost their pitcher. But the Giants are the team that they're getting the most ownership on the slate right now, not by a wide margin, but slightly ahead of the Angels and the Rangers, and they look good. Feltner certainly not a great pitcher. It is a nice park shift for him, but a 226 expected ISO to righties, 172 to lefties. You're gonna have plenty of good left-handed power bats in this lineup. Jock Peterson at 5,100 looks really good. Yaz at 3,800 looks good. Crawford, covers the shortstop position, and then you get the guys from the right side. Assuming Estrada and Flores are back in the lineup, you might have JD Davis in there. So I do think they look good. I'm not as worried about pinch hit risk for them when they face righties either as I am against lefties, because typically they're just going to leave most of these guys in the lineup. So I do like the Giants. Certainly just need to find ways to balance out that ownership.
Yeah, and the Giants are always fun to roster because their lineup's usually not in as I'm building my lineup. So then I get to late swap a bunch of players that don't end up starting. Guys, that's going to bring us right up to the end of the show here. We've got a football show, I think, coming up next to clear out of the way for here. Make sure you're hitting our sponsor Prize Picks. Make sure you guys are using the promo code MLB Strategy Show to get a half off your first week if you're a new subscriber. Promo code Primetime for $1 access to the single game slates for NFL. That one ends today. So if you want to take advantage, make sure you're getting in and jumping on that today. We've got NFL strategy show coming up immediately after this. We've got MMA strategy show a little later in the day. MLB live before lock later on, all sorts of stuff. NFL showdown, deeper dive later on. NFL showdown live before lock for the Thursday games. Just all kinds of stuff going on. So make sure you're staying tuned into the channel all day long, gang. Good luck out there today.